Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you work in bioanalysis or biomarker development, you already know the absolute soul-crushing pain we're talking about today. You know the feeling. Your ligand-binding assay looked absolutely perfect during development. The surrogate matrix was behaving beautifully, the controls were super tight, but then you move over to validation, you introduce authentic study samples, and suddenly, literally everything falls apart. The assay response is completely distorted. Well, today we are exploring a forensic decision tree derived directly from Dr. Ruben O's Root Cause Guide at the Assay DOE blog. We'll be walking through a step-by-step diagnostic workflow to isolate and resolve these parallelism failures, so you can stop wasting weeks on random trial and error guessing. Okay, so let's dive right into this by drawing a really hard line between dilution linearity and true parallelism failure, because it's such a common trap to confuse the two. Dilution linearity usually just tests whether a spiked sample, which is already way above your quantitative range, can be diluted back into range accurately. But parallelism? Parallelism asks a much harder question. It asks whether authentic, incurred samples, with all of their chaotic endogenous complexity, respond proportionally as they're diluted. The absolutely crucial point here is that your method can easily pass spiked dilution experiments with flying colors, but still completely fail when endogenous matrix components alter your analyte capture or detection. Passing a spiked sample is just not going to save you from real-world matrix interference. So here is our workflow for today. First, the crime scene. Second, the baseline check. Third, the biological suspects. Fourth, matrix versus reagent drift. And finally, number 5, the DOE escalation. Section 1, the crime scene, identifying the failure. So what does this actually look like at the bench? These are the specific symptoms lab staff see when an assay looks perfectly fine in development, but completely bombs once it hits authentic study samples. It's baffling, right? Teams usually describe this in really operational terms. They'll say, the dilution series just looks wrong, or the back-calculated concentrations start drifting as the samples are diluted. Maybe your high-value samples absolutely refuse to recover, or your biomarker ELISA suddenly becomes wildly unpredictable in patient serum. When your assay loses confidence in authentic samples like this, you aren't just dealing with broad precision issues. You are dealing with a full-blown parallelism failure that demands focused attention. Moving to Section 2, the baseline check. Fix the curve. Before we even think about looking at the samples, we have to make sure our baseline magnifying glass isn't broken. This is a step so many teams skip in their panic. You have to review your calibrator fit, check those replicate residuals, look closely for top-end compression, and validate your anchor placement. Why? Because if your curve is mathematically unstable, you literally cannot diagnose parallelism against a moving target. Not every non-parallel dilution series is some deep biological mystery. Actually, sometimes it's just a mathematical illusion caused by a standard curve that's completely unstable at the top end, or an assay range that is simply overstated. So rule number 1, fix the curve first. Section 3, the biological suspects, sample behavior. Now let's look at how authentic biological samples behave across different donors. This brilliantly illustrates how to interpret serial dilution failures. You simply can't rely on a single pooled sample. For example, if donor A fails at a low dilution but the others are totally fine, well, we're likely looking at donor-specific interference, isolated incident. But what if every single donor fails at a low dilution and then suddenly improves, or passes at a higher dilution? That points to a widespread matrix issue, and that strongly suggests an insufficient minimum required dilution, or MRD. This specific pattern right here is exactly what we need to look for to diagnose the root cause. If we suspect widespread interference, we need to deliberately challenge the minimum required dilution. But don't just adjust it casually. Select a practical series like 1 to 2, 1 to 5, 1 to 10, and 1 to 20, and run a small set of authentic samples across it. What you are really looking for is the exact moment the background and sensitivity stabilize. You see, in many cases of matrix interference, the apparent concentration shifts because the endogenous interference actually weakens faster than the analyte signal as you dilute it. Once the interference is sufficiently diluted out, boom, the curve stabilizes. Section 4. Matrix versus region drift evaluation. But hey, what if dilution doesn't fix it? Well, it turns out a really critical step here is distinguishing between true biological matrix effects and reagent performance drift. Biological effects are endogenous. We're talking about things like soluble receptors, lipids, or disease state components that are actively altering signal generation in a concentration-dependent way. Those usually weaken with dilution. Reagent drift, on the other hand, is purely mechanical. It's a lot-to-lot shift in your capture antibody, your detector reagent, or your blocker. This totally mimics sample-dependent non-parallelism, but it's completely an illusion created by your materials. So how do we spot this reagent drift out in the wild? If your parallelism failure started right during a transfer to a QC lab, or if issues only appear after a reagent change, or maybe they worsen after a site transfer, or, get this, they're tied to specific operators or plate lots. Stop. Literally, do not try to re-optimize the entire assay. You almost certainly have a reagent compatibility problem rather than a universal matrix problem. Always check these artifacts first. It will save you a massive headache and weeks of unnecessary rework. Section 5. The DOE Escalation. Systematic Solutions. So eventually, manual one-factor-at-a-time testing reaches its limit. Ask yourself this. At what point do you stop randomly swapping buffers and finally bring in the heavy artillery? Ad hoc troubleshooting? Just trying a different buffer to see what happens? It mostly just generates ambiguous data and burns straight through your project schedule. These right here are your clear indicators that it is absolutely time to switch from manual tests to a systematic design of experiments, or DOE. When multiple variables like your MRD, blocker composition, and diluent are all interacting with each other, changing them one by one virtually guarantees you are going to miss the combination that actually resolves the issue. If your assay improves at a higher MRD, but you now need to somehow balance that parallelism with low-end sensitivity and precision, one-factor troubleshooting is simply inefficient. DOE allows us to step back and study these interactions systematically. There's a really fascinating point in the source material that sums this up perfectly. It says, DOE does not replace scientific judgment. It gives you better evidence when several plausible causes remain on the table. I love that because it brilliantly illustrates that DOE is meant for complex, multivariate problems. It is not some magic band-aid for a broken standard curve, and it definitely won't fix a basic handling error. But once our diagnostic pass has narrowed the field, DOE is the ultimate tool to optimize those competing outcomes, like signal-to-noise versus precision, without just flying blind. We've covered a ton of ground today, and we know exactly how soul-crushing and utterly exhausting it is to watch an assay fail in validation when you are staring down a massive deadline. Lab burnout is very real. But having a structured, forensic approach like this decision tree can literally give you back your sanity and your weekends. If this explainer brought value to your work, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with your lab mates to keep your skills sharp. And I want you to drop a comment below right now with your absolute worst assay nightmare. Seriously, let's vent and learn from each other's battles. But before we go, I want to leave you with this thought. As our biomarkers become more and more complex, will one-factor troubleshooting soon become completely obsolete in modern biology? Thanks for exploring this with me, and I'll see you next time.